UFC 310, Pantoja versus Asakura. You know the drill. I'm going to go ahead and break down each of these fights. I'll be shocked if I get a single pick wrong. Let's get right into it. First off, we have Kennedy Nzechukwu versus Lukasz Brzeski. This fight's taking place in the heavyweight division where Kennedy made his debut versus Chris Barnett a month or so ago. He didn't really have a chance to really show his stuff off because Barnett pretty much blew his knee out instantly. Brzeski is a smaller heavyweight. I don't think he poses much of a finishing threat, does Brzeski. He doesn't have a lot of power. He doesn't really get a lot of finishes. He doesn't get finished himself too often because, I just don't think he really puts himself in kind of dangerous positions. He's not really going to stand and trade in there. I don't think he's going to have a whole lot for Kennedy Nzechukwu. I think Kennedy's going to be the bigger guy here despite being the former light heavyweight of the two. We're taking Kennedy Nzechukwu to win this one by decision. Next up, we have Clay Guida versus Chase Hooper. Not much to say about Clay Guida, UFC legend. He is fourth in all-time fights with 36. I believe this is his 37th. The guy's been in there with, so many greats. He's taken on Chase Hooper, who's really kind of growing into his own as of late. I think he's added on to his frame quite a bit. I mean, when he came into the UFC, he was like 18, 19 years old, scrawny. He's put on a lot of muscle. You can just kind of tell. And physically, I just think he's in a lot better place. Guida's going to try and wrestle here, which he does against everyone, but I think that's going to play into Chase Hooper's plans. He's comfortable fighting this off his back. I think he just poses too much of a submission threat, and youth will kind of prevail here. I'm taking Hooper by submission. Next fight up is Michael Chiesa versus Max Griffin. Two fighters, both pushing 40 years old. Griffin is the older guy here, although Chiesa's been showing his age a little bit as of late. He hasn't had a whole lot of success. He's definitely desperate for a win. I don't see why he can't out-grapple Max Griffin. If there's any guy to do it to of his most recent opponents, I think it is Max Griffin. I think Chiesa can grapple his way to a decision here, win with some top control. I think if he really just finds a takedown in a round, he'll be able to keep it on the ground for the duration. So we're taking Chiesa by decision. Next up is Cody Durden versus Josh Van in the flyweight division. Van has been one of the most active fighters on the roster. A lot of fun to watch. This is his fourth fight this year. I think he had a couple last year where he made his in his debuting year. He got KO'd in July versus Charles Johnson, who has really come alive as of late, but we saw kind of the reach disadvantage kind of turn into an issue. Van has taken quite a bit of punishment in his last fight as well at the Sphere. One of the better fights on that card, if not, the second or third best. Obviously went down to the wire, but he did end up pulling through to get the win there. But yeah, versus Edgar Chairez, he did take a lot of damage. He's taking on Cody Durden, who's going to have a whole lot of experience on him. Good wrestling. I think I can see Durden taking down Josh Van, and even just the threat of the takedown kind of opening up his stand-up. I think Durden wins this one by decision. He's a tough draw, probably one of the better fighters that Van has faced behind Charles Johnson. I think Durden gets this one done on the cards. Next up, we have actually a catchweight fight between Chris Weidman and Eryk Anders. This fight did get canceled the first time around, a month or two ago when it was originally scheduled. Wasn't too hung up about it back then, but we are getting it this time around. Weidman's last fight versus Bruno Silva was super bizarre. It was kind of just marred by eye pokes and just dirty fighting it was just ugly, just an ugly fight to watch. I think he wants to end his fight on a higher note than that. He did come away with the win, but I don't know if he wanted to end it there. Is he thinking about retirement if he wins here? I don't know if maybe he said anything publicly about it, but it wouldn't shock me. I think Eryk Anders is the guy who he can get it done against. Anders is really just going to try and grapple. That's kind of his whole game. I think Weidman is going to have a bit of an advantage on the feet, and I don't really see Anders being able to take down Weidman. We're taking Weidman to win this by decision. Next up is a really interesting fight between Randy Brown and Bryan Battle in the welterweight division. Battle did miss weight, so we got to start with that. He came in like 4 or 5 pounds over. Fight is going on as intended. Kind of sucks to see. Battle obviously started his career as like a heavyweight. The guy was huge, but came into the UFC and the Ultimate Fighter as a middleweight, moved down to welterweight where he's really showed out. I think it's his first time missing weight as a welterweight, so hopefully he can get that figured out. But happy this fight is going on. Still, Battle is so good on the feet. Him winning by KO over Giuseppe was one of our best picks of this year, I felt. One of my most confident picks, and he really showed out. He did kind of show a more volume-heavy approach in that fight. Showed some versatility. He's got one-punch knockout power, but I really liked how he looked in that Giuseppe fight where he just really put the pace on Giuseppe and just drowned him. Randy Brown is a really tough opponent. Been in there with a lot of guys. Really, I mean, who did JD? I think JDM KO'd him, but besides that, he hasn't had a whole lot of losses as of late. I think Battle just has more power than Randy Brown. I think his punches are going to have a bit more sting on them. Both are tall, long guys, but I really like where Battle's at. Obviously, those few extra pounds could end up benefiting him quite a bit as well. We're taking Battle to win this one by decision. Bit of a decision fest so far in the picks. But next up, we do have Movsar Evloev versus Aljamain Sterling. Probably the, most intriguing card on the prelims. Don't know why it's not on the main card. Possibly the UFC just doesn't really want to spotlight these guys too much because, I don't know, both you can make the argument for both being pretty boring, to be honest. That being said, I do think Evloev, we'll start with him. I think he's honestly underrated despite being, a top 5 or so ranked fighter. I don't think he gets the respects he deserves as a top 5 talent. The guy's really good. The reason for the disrespect, though, has to be the guy has not found a single finish in his UFC career. He's 8-0, undefeated in his career, in his UFC career, obviously undefeated overall as well. You got to start getting some finishes, dude. People are not going to pay attention. They don't want to watch you wrestle guys, for 15 minutes straight, which, in his defense, you do see him having success on the feet as well. I mean, in that Arnold Allen fight, he wasn't just clinging on to Arnold Allen's back. He did, he was active when he did have, back control, trying to land strikes. So I do think he's going to make a bit of an effort to look for finishes now, but we got to start seeing some, dude. Aljamain obviously just made his featherweight debut in his previous fight versus Calvin Kattar. Looked good, not the most exciting fight, but it was a good one to kind of get his feet wet in the division. Kattar's a bigger guy, and I think he handled his own in the stand-up where Kattar really shines with his boxing, and he was just relentless with the wrestling. I can totally see Aljamain reversing a takedown from Evloev and climbing onto his back. That really seems like Aljo's recipe for victory against pretty much everyone he faces. If he gets on your back, he is just a nightmare to deal with. That being said, Evloev is just such a strong wrestler. I don't think he'll really put himself in that position, and I do think he has the skill set and just the physicality to defend against those positions. We're taking Evloev to win this one by decision. I think he's actually going to show quite a bit off on the feet versus Aljamain as well. Next up is a welterweight fight between Vicente Luque and Themba Gorimbo. Luque just has not looked the same as of recent. Obviously, Joaquin Buckley just finished him. Doesn't look like the guy we're used to seeing. We'll see what version of Luque we get tomorrow. But if it is kind of the guy we've been seeing as of late, I think Themba is really going to put the pressure on him. I'm a bit skeptical of Themba and his peak potential, but there's definitely a lot there to be excited about with him. He's tall, he's long. I mean, he's got a few KOs, and it looks like his grappling is pretty solid as well. So it's not like he has any glaring weaknesses that Luque can look to exploit here. Luque probably is going to hit quite a bit harder, but yeah, it just depends on how Luque is going to look taking a hit. He hasn't looked great. I think Gorimbo wins this one by decision. Next up, we have Dominick Reyes versus Anthony Smith in the light heavyweight division. Smith did miss weight by a couple pounds as well. I'm not going to look too deep into that. I think really the story of this fight is athletically, Dominick Reyes is just so much more explosive than Anthony Smith, which is just so important in this game. Smith, has looked a bit slower as of late. Obviously, we saw in the Khalil Roundtree fight, he was just, couldn't athletically match up with a guy like that. Reyes doesn't have quite the power as Roundtree and maybe some of the other guys Anthony Smith has fought, but I think he's smart enough not to get caught into any, crazy guillotines a la Vitor Petrino. And his matchup with Anthony Smith, Reyes is just going to have so much more power. Fight starts standing, and I think we're going to see Dominick Reyes really show out here and get a KO. Next fight up is a featherweight matchup between Nate Landwehr and Dooho Choi. I am a really big fan of Choi. I think he's really underrated for the division. Obviously, he hasn't gotten the wins too much as of late, but I think his last fight versus Bill Algeo, he really put it all together and showed that he has a lot of potential. The guy's got, crazy power. We saw him KO Algeo in kind of like, I think he might have broke his, eye socket. I don't know exactly what happened, but his hands look so quick in that matchup. Obviously, Bill Algeo is not the most accomplished striker, but I saw a lot from Dooho and Choi that was encouraging in this matchup versus Nate Landwehr, where Nate Landwehr takes a lot of damage. He gets hit a lot. I think some of the shots he's taken in recent fights, he's not going to take too well versus a guy like Dooho Choi, who's super powerful. Obviously, Nate Landwehr is just an absolute dog, and if this fight, turns into an absolute brawl, both guys are tired, I think Nate wins pretty much almost any matchup like that where both guys, it's just a total slugfest. But I don't know if we're going to get to that point. I think Dooho Choi is going to connect with him early and find a round 1 KO. Next up on the main card here, we have the fight, the imposter fight, if you will. It is Bryce Mitchell taking on Kron Gracie. The last name privilege is real here because there really is no reason why Kron Gracie should be in this position if his last name wasn't Gracie, for being honest. I think Bryce is just going to maul him. Not a whole lot to talk about here. MMA Jiu-Jitsu is different than regular Jiu-Jitsu. I mean, if these guys threw the gis on, maybe Kron wins this one, although I'm not even so sure that's the case. But, yeah, Mitchell, I think he finds a KO. I think Kron's going to be way too comfortable, fighting off of his back. Or even on the feet, I think Bryce Mitchell can put some work in on the feet and find a KO. Next fight up on the card, we have a heavyweight match between Ciryl Gane and Alexander Volkov. This is the rematch. These two already fought in 2021. Tells you a lot about the state of the heavyweight division when we're running back fights for really no reason. I guess it's, a good opportunity for Alexander Volkov, a guy who's been really turning up as of late. He's on a 4-fight win streak. 3 of those were finishes. The most recent over Pavlovich, it looked like he was going to find a KO. I mean, he absolutely battered Pavlovich. But the first time around, this fight wasn't particularly close. Ciryl Gane really dominated with a lot of teep kicks, leg kicks. I think the Muay Thai weapons from Ciryl Gane are really what separate him from some of the other heavyweights. Besides the fact that he's just way more athletic than 99% of the guys he comes up against. He's just way quicker. Moves like a middleweight. My only concern with Ciryl Gane is I'm starting to wonder if he maybe hits like a middleweight too. He does not seem to have the power in his hands as a lot of the other guys in the division. Like Volkov, I think, hits a lot harder than Ciryl Gane. That being said, Gane makes up for it with volume, and he mixes up, the body shots so well. He did KO Sergey Spivak in his most recent fight, I believe in France. But, Spivak was kind of a bit of a punching bag. He really just had to defend one takedown, and that was the story of the fight. I think Volkov can make it interesting, but yeah, I don't know if a whole lot has changed to make me think that Volkov is going to win this time around. I do worry about Cyril Gane and these hand injuries that obviously he dealt with going into the John Jones fight. It seems that that's kind of plagued him a bit throughout his career, which perhaps that could explain why, sometimes it seems like he's hesitant to let his hands go a bit. But we'll see. Regardless, we're taking Gane to win this one by decision. 3-round fight, I think, benefits him too because he's able to just stay light on his feet the entire time, use his quickness. I think he's winning on the cards. Our co-main event is an absolute banger. It is Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Ian Garry. Winner takes on Bilal. It's pretty much set in stone at this point. Let's start with Garry. I mean, obviously his stock took a big hit in his matchup versus MVP. Not a great performance. He got totally outclassed on the feet. I think the one, the one kind of thing to take away from that is I think MVP makes a lot of guys look silly on the feet as well. That dude is just so fast, but definitely concerning. I wouldn't be surprised if MVP would have a similar amount of success on the feet versus a guy like Shavkat Rakhmonov, honestly. I think the speed difference would be pretty apparent there. But Ian Garry did what he had to do, which was pretty much just grab a hold of MVP and pray for the fight to end. Definitely not his best performance in the UFC, but he's had some other absolutely electric performances. Obviously, he got dropped by Song Kanan, which is concerning, but then had one of the best finishing sequences of that year, I felt. So the good from Ian Garry is really good. The bad is pretty bad. Shavkat, on the other hand, obviously 18-0, all wins by finish. He's looking like he's shaping up to be one of the best finishers in the welterweight division, not just now, but of all time. But he's looked human as well. I mean, Jeff Neal cracked him bad, definitely stunned him a few times in that fight where the guy gets hit. I'll say that about Shavkat Rakhmonov. Even in some of his fights before joining the UFC, we've seen him get hurt before, where you just, as a human being, you just can't consistently be taking those shots. And I think he's kind of grown a bit of a bad habit that hasn't quite, backfired on him yet because he's just ended up finishing everyone. But yeah, the guy does get hit a lot, which I think could play a factor into this fight. If I'm Ian Garry, I'm looking to extend the fight. You want to drag this into the third, fourth round and try to just pace yourself to where you can kind of tire Shavkat out, because I do think some of those bad defensive habits of not really protecting himself could backfire in this one. That being said, I don't know if Ian can really just survive the onslaught early from Shavkat. He's going to be threatening him with the grappling, where I think he'll just be physically able to impose himself on Ian Garry. And obviously on the feet, Shavkat just hits so hard. This one's a really tough one for me. I think Ian Garry, for what it's worth, is great value. He's like a 4-1 underdog. I don't know, that he's still undefeated for a reason. This has been probably one of the hardest fights for me to pick, but I think we're just going to have to go with Shavkat by submission here. I think he's just going to mix it up with Ian Garry a lot, and if Ian Garry exposes his neck for even a second, Shavkat's just going to snatch it up. Finally, we have our main event is Alexandre Pantoja versus Kai Asakura in the flyweight division. For the belt, Kai making his debut here. I remember being really excited when the UFC signed him. Never did I think that they were actually going to give him a title shot off the rip, which, I think he's definitely benefited from kind of there being not a whole lot of great other options who were ready at this time of the year. I mean, I probably would have been happy with the UFC, maybe even giving Kai Kara-France the shot here, but alas, Kai Asakura is will be getting the shot here versus Pantoja, and I'm liking his odds, to be honest. I mean, he's got a bunch of KOs under his belt. Of course, a few of those were from just basically punting his opponent's faces while they're on the ground. That weapon is not going to be available to him in the UFC, but some of those knees, I mean, I like that he looks to land knees often, which obviously you can't do it on a grounded opponent, but with the rule change, I could see him taking advantage of some of those knees that weren't available to fighters prior to last month. And I think he just has the skill set to really give Pantoja a lot of problems. The issues I've seen with Pantoja are just kind of those long periods of inactivity. I mean, it's proven to be absolutely genius because he's learned how to just win rounds. But that's really kind of the end of it. He knows how to kind of take a step back, chill with the output a bit. He kind of recharges his battery, and then he explodes and just wins rounds in the latter half of them. Like, he'll land a takedown, and if he gets on top of you, you're just not really getting up. So I think that's benefited him a great deal, and it's been kind of the key to his success so far. But I think Asakura, a guy who's just super ultra aggressive, is not going to give Pantoja the time there to breathe like that and take those times off. Asakura is not afraid to take a shot to land one, and I think he's going to have more power. He's a big 125er. He's going to have a couple inches on Pantoja. He's never faced a grappler of Pantoja's level, but I don't think we've seen Asakura really get dominated on the ground. This one's a really tough one to fight. I mean, you kind of have to use his Manel Kape, who I think was maybe one of the only opponents who are now in the UFC who he came up against, and obviously he lost that fight versus Manel Kape, but so he kind of really hasn't proved it against a UFC kind of guy. But the guy's 20-4 or 21-4. It's not a fluky record. I mean, he's earned his wins. I think Asakura has what it takes to beat Pantoja in this one. We're taking him by KO. I think he's just not going to let up. He's going to come out ultra aggressive, and Pantoja, I think, is just going to crumble under the pressure, honestly. Pantoja's super good. I mean, he's champ for a reason, but Asakura, I don't know. I'm just liking what I'm seeing out of him, so we're picking him by KO. That's the breakdown. I have a pretty decent card coming up next week to wrap up the year, so be on the lookout for that. We'll catch you on the next one.